It was supposed to be a straightforward business trip, but the events that unfolded at the airport that day were anything but ordinary. As I arrived at the bustling international terminal, I had no idea how bizarre things would become. I had a morning flight to catch, so I arrived early, only to find the check-in counter swarming with people. Passengers were in a state of frustration, shouting and arguing with the airline staff. I managed to find a free agent and inquired about the situation. It turned out that the airline's computer systems had crashed, causing massive delays and cancellations. Passengers were furious, and the airport staff were struggling to maintain order. As the hours passed, it became clear that my flight was also affected, so I joined the long line of disgruntled travelers. While I waited, I noticed a woman nearby who was oddly calm. She was sitting quietly with her eyes fixed on her phone, her behavior strangely detached. As my patience waned and my frustration grew, I couldn't help but glance in her direction from time to time. It was then that I noticed her discreetly exchanging messages with someone on her phone. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided to approach her and strike up a conversation. I introduced myself, and she responded in a friendly manner, though her eyes seemed to hold a secret. She mentioned that she was a travel blogger and often found herself in unpredictable situations like this one. As we talked, I learned that her name was Rebecca, and she was traveling to a remote island to review a luxury resort. Her calm nature had a soothing effect, and I found myself sharing my own frustrations about the flight delays. Rebecca smiled and suggested that we make the most of the situation. She recommended exploring the airport, which had an interesting art gallery on display. Desperate to escape the commotion at the check-in counter, I agreed, and we set off to explore the terminal. The art gallery was indeed a serene and captivating space, filled with fascinating sculptures and paintings, but the serenity was short-lived. As we strolled through the gallery, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly blared, and the emergency lights began to flash. Panic set in, and the few visitors in the gallery started rushing toward the exit. Rebecca and I joined the frantic crowd, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. It was then that an announcement came over the loudspeakers, instructing all passengers to evacuate the airport immediately. Confusion and fear gripped the crowd as we streamed toward the exits. Airport personnel directed us to a safe zone outside, away from the terminal. Once we were safely outside, the chaos became even more surreal. I noticed that the woman, Rebecca, had vanished. I looked around searching for her, but she seemed to have disappeared into thin air. As the minutes turned into hours, the airport authorities remained tight-lipped about the reason for the evacuation. Passengers, including myself, were left bewildered and anxious, unsure of what had triggered the emergency. The situation grew even more bizarre when rumors started circulating among the evacuees. Some claimed that a dangerous substance had been found in the terminal, while others whispered about a possible security threat. The uncertainty and fear in the crowd were palpable. Hours later, as we awaited updates, an announcement came over the loudspeakers declaring the airport safe for re-entry. The passengers were allowed to return to the terminal, though the sense of unease lingered. I made my way back inside, my thoughts consumed by the strange disappearance of Rebecca. As I reached the check-in counter, I couldn't help but wonder whether she had been aware of the impending emergency and had vanished for a reason. My flight eventually departed, but I couldn't stop thinking about the strange woman I met at the airport and whether she had anything to do with the bizarre incidents that day. Before we move on to the next story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? If so, please share your experience in the comments section. I read all your comments and try to reply to everyone. Additionally, I will feature some of your experiences in my next videos. The day I traveled from Texas, I had just landed at an unfamiliar airport in Brazil after a long 10-hour flight as part of my international studies program abroad. It was late at night, and the terminal was nearly deserted. My host had mixed up the dates of my arrival, so I had to find a hotel to stay in for the night before they could arrive in the morning to greet me. As a female who traveled often, I was always careful not to stay in empty or deserted areas for too long. I was more than eager to collect my luggage and head to my hotel for some much-needed rest. As I waited at the baggage carousel, I noticed a man standing a few feet away. He was disheveled, with a vacant look in his eyes, and his skin was a sickly white, almost gray. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming he was just another tired traveler, but as the minutes passed, I grew increasingly uneasy. The man began to approach me slowly, his gaze never leaving me. He was mumbling something under his breath, perhaps in another language, as I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. I decided to speak. "Sir, are you okay?" I said softly. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head and muttered almost inaudibly, "No, she will be here very soon." I was startled by his response, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something very bad was about to happen. I started to look around, hoping to spot an airport security officer, but the terminal remained eerily empty. When the man was just a few steps away, he suddenly lunged at me, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. He repeated his previous answer, this time with a chilling cackle, "She will be here very soon." I screamed, and the few other travelers in the area turned their attention toward us, but nobody moved to help. In a panic, I managed to free myself from his grasp and darted away, rushing toward the airport exit. The man pursued me, and I was overcome with fear, wondering why this insane maniac was chasing after me. As I reached the exit, I finally spotted a police officer standing nearby. Out of breath, I rushed over and managed to explain the situation to the officer, pointing to the man who was still following me. The officer immediately approached the man, questioning his intentions. After several minutes, the police officer called for medical assistance, and the man was taken into custody for evaluation and treatment. The police officer explained that the man had mistaken me for someone else. Apparently, his wife had tragically died in a plane crash that was scheduled to land at the airport several years ago. He had been waiting for her arrival, and the grief from his wife's death caused the man to spiral into a severe depression. As a result, he would occasionally visit the airport terminal at night, waiting for his deceased wife to return from her trip. His words, "No, she will be here very soon," now made sense to me. Sadly, it took me more than an hour to hail a taxi and make it to my hotel that night. I was exhausted and felt dirty, like I had just been in a fight with a wild animal. I was deeply disturbed by what had happened and made up my mind to never fly late at night ever again. Before we move on to the next story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? If so, please share your experience in the comments section. I read all your comments and try to reply to everyone. Additionally, I will feature some of your experiences in my next videos. The airport's fluorescent lights flickered on and off, casting an eerie glow on the tired faces of travelers. My family and I were navigating through the crowded terminal, carefully maneuvering our way and pulling our suitcases along. We were excited about our vacation, but little did we know that the horrors we would encounter were much worse than any travel inconvenience. As we neared the security checkpoint, my wife and I exchanged glances, both understanding the challenge of managing our lively 6-year-old daughter, Lily. She was full of boundless energy, darting between strangers and giggling joyfully while we struggled to keep up. The security area was chaotic, with frustrated travelers and busy TSA officers. I kept a close watch on Lily as she clung to my finger, inching forward in the line as we approached the X-ray machine. As we neared the moving belt, I noticed a man wearing a tattered jacket standing alone among families. For a brief moment, our eyes met before he quickly looked away, his dark and unsettling gaze leaving me uneasy. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as mere paranoia. Airports are full of unknown individuals, after all. I kept Lily close as our belongings went through the scanner, ensuring she stayed within reach. However, the man in the old jacket seemed to be following us, creating a tense atmosphere. I glanced back, and this time, he was staring at Lily for a longer period, making my heart race. The security process dragged on forever, amplifying my discomfort. My wife noticed my anxiety and gave me a concerned look. "Everything okay?" she whispered. I forced a smile, but deep down, something felt terribly wrong. We gathered our belongings and headed to the departure gate, with the man still trailing behind us like a shadow. I quickened our pace, but he kept up. When we arrived at the gate, I decided to confront him. I turned around, ready to demand an explanation, but he had vanished, swallowed by the crowd. Panic welled up inside me as I scanned the sea of people. Where had he gone? The boarding announcement snapped me back to reality, and we lined up to board the plane. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching us, lurking in the shadows. My thoughts spiraled as I worried about Lily's safety. Once seated, the roar of the airplane's engines drowned out the chaos of the airport, but the knot in my stomach tightened. The flight itself was uneventful, but my anxiety intensified upon landing. I clung to the hope that the man was just a figment of my imagination, a product of the hectic airport environment. But when we disembarked, I saw him again, standing near the gate. This time, I was certain he was following us. Gripping my wife's hand tightly, I pulled her aside and whispered urgently, "We need help. That man is following us." Her eyes widened in fear as she glanced over my shoulder. Desperation set in as we hurried toward the nearest airport security officer. I described the situation in detail, my words laced with the worry for my daughter's safety. The security team acted swiftly, alerting local authorities and initiating a search for the man in the tattered jacket. We were escorted to a safe area while we waited anxiously for news. The fear and panic gnawed at me as I replayed everything in my mind. In such a busy airport, how had this man singled us out? Was Lily in danger? Time seemed to crawl as we waited, each passing second heightening my dread. Finally, a police officer approached us with a grim expression. They had identified the man and discovered a disturbing fact. He had a history of attempting to abduct children. My stomach churned, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The sound of Lily's innocent laughter echoed in my mind, a stark reminder of how differently things could have turned out. Though the man was apprehended, the emotional toll lingered. Our once exciting vacation had turned into a nightmare. The airport, typically a bustling place of transitions, had become the setting for every parent's worst fear. Later, we learned that the man had been discreetly observing families, searching for vulnerable targets. If we hadn't been vigilant, and if airport security hadn't acted quickly, things could have gone horribly wrong. The moment he set his sights on Lily, with ill intentions in his eyes, our world changed. As we left the airport, the cold night air stung my face, and I held Lily close, acutely aware of life's fragility. The events of that day will forever haunt me, a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that clung to me. The airport, once a symbol of adventure and exploration, now served as a haunting reminder that darkness can invade even the most routine experiences. The flickering fluorescent lights seemed to whisper a disturbing message. Vigilance, even in mundane situations, could be the difference between safety and unimaginable terror. If you find these stories chilling, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more gripping tales. Share your story in the comments below. I love to hear your experiences. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.